Crybaby again. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Good to see you.
Yes, sir. Good to see you.
Um, I'd like to talk about the geologic column, which I think you were just discussing.
Sure. Let me call up a
And
picture here.
sure,
Call up a picture.
um,
Okay.
if a deck of cards represents the sedimentary layers, say in the Grand Canyon, shuffling the deck doesn't represent what actually occurs with the deposition of each sedimentary layer. What we have would be a single card laid down in a particular environment, followed by card after card on top of it, each representing the environment and time period it formed in. And sometimes the top cards would erode away if they were, say, exposed to erosion. And then if sea level rose, additional cards would be laid on top of that. So that's where the top card comes from, is the last card that has not eroded away in that particular location. Let's keep in mind that the geologic column, just one
Okay.
point more.
Sure.
Just keep in mind that the geologic column changes wherever you are, depending on what the sedimentary layers or igneous layers are in that particular area. So in the Grand Canyon, it's going to be different than in other parts of the country and in the world. There's not just one geologic column. So go ahead, Kent, and then we can
Okay.
discuss.
Okay. If you shuffle a deck of cards, is the top card younger than the bottom card?
Well, in that case, that was the last layer that you put on top of the pile. But what my point was is that's not what happens in nature. You're actually just adding card upon card as each sedimentary layer is deposited
Okay.
in
Hold it.
that particular
Right.
environment. Go ahead.
I understand. If we're adding a layer on top, where is it coming from? If it's coming from someplace else, that doesn't change the age of it. It's
Well, it's
reshuffled the
coming
same
from
dirt.
erosion, and
Right.
then it's being deposited,
Yeah.
as a new
It's a,
layer.
it's,
If there
but it's the
was
same. It's the same dirt.
a volcanic, if there was a volcanic, okay, if there was a volcanic layer, and then another volcano went off and put another layer on top of that 500 years later, those two later layers would be 500 years difference in age, correct? In terms of the layer itself, the lava layer itself. Is that right?
Right. This is igneous rock. We're talking about sedimentary rock. The Grand Canyon contains probably, I'm going to take a wild guess and say there are 15 or 20 different layers of limestone. How do you tell the difference between Permian limestone and Cretaceous limestone? They're both limestone.
Well, we tell the difference in the aging of the layers that are on either side of that particular limestone, unless there's elements of volcanic rock in that limestone, which could occur. But the evidence we have that it's laid card upon card, like I was describing, is the fossils at the bottom of the Grand Canyon are single-celled organisms that become more complex as you go up through the stratigraphic column until at the top in the Permian limestone, it's the Kaibab limestone. You actually have fish fossils up in that area. So the fossils have gotten more complex. They don't follow your sorting model that you have for your flood.
Hang on, one
Yeah,
topic at
go
a time.
ahead. Go ahead.
They most certainly do. Get a jar, put some sand, gravel, dirt, water in there, and shake it up. It'll settle into layers based on body density, based on the density of the material, or based on surface tension. There are a lot of different factors. Sorting of materials based on, uh, here, flip this thing over. I just made about 30 different layers. Are these layers different ages? No.
No, because that represents, that sand art toy represents one particular depositional event.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about depositional event after depositional event. If you had sand
Well,
art toy over,
wait a minute. How do you
yeah,
know that? How do you know these weren't all deposited in one flood? It would
well,
do the same thing.
because what we see in each layer is particular to the fossils that are found there. So
Ah,
we
now
talked
you got
about
it.
this. We talked about this before,
Right.
that you find in a sand beach deposit, you find clams and different organisms that lived in a beach.
Right.
If it's a river environment, which there are rocks that were deposited in a river environment, then you have organisms that are associated with that environment. So it's not a chaotic, each layer is not chaotic, which is what you would expect from a flood. Each layer is specific to the paleo ecosystem that those organisms lived in at the time that that deposition happened. Go ahead,
And
Ken.
this is what you've been taught, I know, and this is what you try to teach
Well,
others.
I've done field work. I'm a
Oh,
geologist, so I've
uh,
observed this in the field.
yeah. I don't know how you get a degree in geology. Maybe you did. Okay. People in
Well, I
China get
did. I
well,
did.
good. Well, people in communist countries get degrees in communism, and they think that's true because that's what they learned in school, and they get a PhD in communism. Okay, it doesn't make it
Well,
true.
you're saying there's no validity to geology whatsoever in
Oh,
studying geology?
I taught earth science for 15 years. I'm very
Okay.
familiar. Okay.
Well, that's kind of what it sounded like there.
Well, yeah, yeah. No. The layers of Grand Canyon are nice, neat strata. There's no erosion marks between them. There are no tree roots in them, no vegetation growing between them, no soil buildup between them. Why are there no erosion marks? These layers were all laid
Well,
down, bang, 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 during one
some
flood.
sometimes there's erosion marks and sometimes there's not, because in a uh, when the sea level rises, you're going to get a beach deposit followed by a siltier layer as the water gets deeper. And as the water gets deeper, you're going to get a limestone layer. So it's going to appear like it's a continual sequence because
Well,
it's based on sea level rising. The whole Grand Canyon is based on either sea level rises or sea level recessions,
okay.
transgressions and recessions of water. Yeah,
Very
go ahead.
familiar with that. Okay. I think you need to watch the video again if you haven't watched it before. Experiments in stratification at Colorado State University or University of Colorado, wherever it was, 30 years ago. A French guy with a name, some kind of French name, he did a great video showing how that in moving water, layers form 8 or 10 layers simultaneously. Maybe 15 layers are forming downstream. So you could have a fossil at the top that's actually older than a fossil at the bottom. Watch experiments in stratification. I encourage everybody to watch that, and you'll see the layers form horizontally, not vertically. And it's all based on circular reasoning. They've known this for 40 years. Here's from American Journal of Science, 1976. The intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply, as long as the feeling explanations are not worth the trouble, as long as the work brings results. It cannot be
Can I
denied that they're arguing in a circle. The
can I
age of the
address
rock.
can I
Yeah,
address that?
Encyclopedia Britannica, 75 years ago, they knew this. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in the Grand Canyon, we have enough volcanic elements throughout the geologic column there that we can date the different layers. And they do show a progressively younger date all the way to the top, which is the Permian. But the lowest layers are Precambrian, the lowest parts of the Grand Canyon. And it just happens there's a sequence, a progression of ages. No ages are out of place.
Okay,
The
well, we got
organisms that you would expect are found there are
right,
single-celled.
right.
They
Hang on,
get more
oh,
complex. Yeah,
hang
go
on,
ahead.
one topic
Yeah,
at a time.
sure.
How are you dating these volcanic layers with some kind of radiometric decay, rubidium, strontium, or lead 208, or uranium?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Could it be that the depth of burial enhances or detracts from their rate of decay? How do you know the rate of decay has been consistent through history when it's only been used in the last 70 years? Just discovered in 1950 after Hiroshima. Man, the radioactive decay.
Well, it's,
Could it
I
be?
mean,
Are there things that
yeah.
affect radioactive decay?
Well, in terms of carbon decay, yes, there are things that can affect. There's things that can affect you collecting the samples. If you're collecting samples from a volcanic rock and it's got older elements in it from, like, say, the parent rock that got ripped off in the volcanic flow, you might be dating some older part of the layer. So scientists are very particular in what they're dating to make sure it represents the age of that flow itself.
Right.
Now, in
I know.
terms of carbon dates, we know that carbon dating has certain flaws based on dead carbon and that kind of thing that have to be taken into account. But we're not dealing with carbon dating, of
Right.
course, in the Grand
Okay.
Canyon.
Well, hang on.
Yeah, go
Let's
ahead.
let's take potassium argon dating, okay? One that they probably use with volcanic rock because it contains some potassium which decays to argon, which is a gas which disappears, okay? If I took a sample of lava, a lava flow, basalt or something like that, and I broke it up into 10 pieces and sent it blindly to 10 different laboratories, didn't tell them a single thing. Here's your $500 or whatever they charge. How old is this rock? I promise you, you would get 10 different numbers. They did it with Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens lava was given to different laboratories. They all gave different numbers. Why?
No, well, the Mount St. Helens rocks were given to, and I think this was by Austin, wasn't it? Did this work?
Several people did that. Steve Austin did it, who's also a geologist, right?
Yeah, but he sent it to a lab where they were not. They said that any rock less than 2 million years, their equipment was not accurate to measure that rock. So of course they got all sorts of weird dates on those rocks. And also when they collected those samples, they don't know that they weren't including older parts because they weren't real particular in where they grabbed those samples. They could have been grabbing older parts of that rock that were ripped off with the new lava. So radiometric dating is highly consistent. And it has been, and I know there are the dates that creationists use to try to debunk it, of course. But they usually can be. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Okay, are you saying if we took one rock, broke it up into 10 pieces, and gave it to 10 laboratories, they're highly consistent in their dating. They would all get the same number. Blind test. That's real science, you know. Blind test, right?
Of course, you would have error bars on that. So, you know, an older rock would have error bars of maybe, you know, a couple million years here on either side of that date that you're going to get. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's not going to be 100% that date that it gives you. There are error bars. Yeah.
You just said it was highly consistent.
Well, an error bar of 2 million years on an 80 million year old rock is highly consistent.
So I'm sure you've seen before the fossil, the wild dates that they get from this. I got them in here. It's in a different presentation, where they take a piece off of a living snail and carbon date it, or potassium argon date it, or you can do iridium, strontium, all the different dating methods. All the dating methods are based on several obvious assumptions. Do you know how much was in it when it was alive or when it was formed? No. Do you know the decay rate has always been the same? No. Do you know it's not been contaminated? No. You cannot prove any of those. In a court of law, all radiometric dates would be thrown out. And keep in mind, all radiometric dates were invented after 1950. The geologic column was invented in 1830. So that is really the standard. And it's what they've been saying.
Of course, we've corroborated carbon dating through even the Dead Sea Scrolls. We've been able to, the date that we got through carbon dating matched the historical date that we got as well. So there's corroboration between carbon dating and, say, dendrochronology, tree ring dating, varves, which are lake sediments that build up annually in a lake. You know, we have varve examples that go back tens of thousands of years that we've also not only been able to count the layers, but we've also been able to date twigs and leaves in those layers. But I don't want to keep you anymore, Kent. Okay. I think we had a good discussion, and I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, sir.